One thing that separates game developers and publishers from one another is the commitment to quality. A lot is being talked about right now in the gaming community because a lot of games lately have been coming out broken. You see, the thing is not necessarily that it just was more recent that this game started coming out broken. It's just that we as gamers, we've been tolerating it for way too long. I think now that we've seen maybe a year like 2023 launch with a bunch of these different video games almost all at the same time being quite problematic at launch, I think it's changed the conversation. Now, from my perspective, I have to say, at a point, you have to look at the developers and say, okay, we understand that we're in the middle of the transition of a new generation based paradigms of developing video games that, gamers want to see more graphic fidelity. They want to see better resolution. They want to see better frame rates. So I understand that this period, this broiler season that we're in, a lot of games are going to take a hit. In fact, the guy that is in charge of Digital Foundry wrote an article on the Eurogamer website where he said expect more 30 FPS games because it appears that the way these games are being made, they're causing a lot of issues on these new systems because they're probably trying to hit a specific goal, but they're just not able to get that particular target met. Something came up on Twitter the other day. I was actually looking around, and a developer who worked on a game that really did bomb, or a game that they knew was not ready but released, actually talked a little bit about it. This is Ian, I think it's Saturdalen. I think that's how you say it. And in this tweet, he's basically replying another tweet that another developer put out where they're asking, you game dev, QRT with your lowest reviewed game and what you loved about it. Throw in a selfie too if you want. Yes, I technically did some work for this one and blah, 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 blah. So this, developer is actually talking about their time working with Aliens Colonial Marines. Now, when you look at this developer's response, you would be very surprised pretty much. So this person said, I learned a lot on this project. We knew it wasn't ready as this game was literally created in 15 months, which is unheard of a game that scope. Anthem 2 would have been great. Now, this was very interesting because there's a whole bunch of stuff with, responses and tweets that he had to pretty much go ahead and, address. But a lot of people were really, interesting in their response. So this person here, the Black Oak Cage, pretty much replied and said, classic example of when devs do their best, but publishers seemingly push for a hard deadline release. Now, this person responded and said something. They said, I'm going to say something spicy. I actually don't think it was all EA's fault. A developer and a publisher is supposed to be in a healthy relationship of trust and transparency. It's a two-way street, which I don't think was satisfied on either side. Ladies and gentlemen, Insomniac may be working on their Spider-Man game in some of the best circumstances ever, but I think there's already a mutual understanding as to how this studio is running things, maybe even some other studios like Santa Monica and even their publisher as well, that gives them an edge and an advantage for their commitments to quality as time goes on. I usually say developers get the benefit of the doubt regardless of, a lot of things, because let me tell you the truth. The people that even run these studios, most of them don't even put their hands on deck to do much. They sit in their offices all day and tell everybody else what to do. I mean, I guess this is the nature of the job. So it's not like I'm saying that they need to pick up a computer and start developing, but I wonder how much these studio leaders that we're seeing their games have issues are invested in their own teams. Not saying that all of them are not, but I wonder how much investment they have in continue to support their teams, encourage their teams, hold them accountable, maybe even put them on blast if they actually are not necessarily meeting goals in order for them to be able to get the job done. This is not the same as saying, oh, they need to crunch. I'm just saying, like, in a workplace, everyone gets held accountable. Most of us here watching YouTube videos, we do have jobs, or we will have jobs one day. We don't mess around in our jobs. We don't go to work late. We don't do anything out of line. And I understand game developers also have to put in, for the most part, extra work in some cases. In fact, this developer was talking about how at that time he was making about $70,000 working on the game. And in many cases, they had to sit there working 80 hours a week sometimes, and not just him, but a lot of other people were. And he joined the project mid-development, basically think about it, 15 months to develop Anthem. So the commitment to quality has to be something that's there. But how do we then, look through a lot of these video games and be able to kind of decipher which video games are going to have that quality commitment? Well, even history right now is not necessarily getting the job done for most of us. And when I say even history, some of you have already seen games like Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, even from a studio like Rocksteady, who had really solid history. We've seen, well, the reveal of the game, I guess. I guess what we can do is we can look at what might be at stake for each of these different, development studios before we make a decision to go ahead and buy a video game. Well, one of them could be, if it's say maybe a Sony first party game, we know that their entire portion, or now it's about 50%, but we know that about 50% of their entire business model relies on them bringing out these games with a lot of polish. It doesn't just affect that one studio, it affects their brand name and affects how people see their hardware market, which is a very, very delicate piece of their market. They really would love to make sure that that hardware market is very well satisfied. So you know that when you buy a Sony game, for the most part, you're going to enjoy some quality. If you're playing on a PlayStation, on a PC, it's a whole different level, guys. It could be anything. Another one is you could see the hunger and the desire from the development studio's eyes. I give you an example in From Software. From Software wants to conquer and destroy everybody else. For some reason, it appears that after their 20 years of almost obscurity, I guess maybe even longer than 20 years of obscurity, Elden Ring finally brought them to the mainstream, and they've tasted a little bit of that. And now they're ready to move from the niche market into the much more general audience. What this means is the quality that they've actually put into those games that they actually made for their niche audiences, the rest of the gaming community is about to start seeing that on a bigger scale. So whether or not you like Elden Ring is not necessarily the issue. From Software is going to make just enough games that you'll be able to find one that you actually like. They're making the Armored Core game. Many people may not like that game who played their regular Dark Souls and other games that in the past, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything other than they're now broadening their market base to wider audiences. This is a very key and critical factor that you have to pay attention to or take into account. Another publisher that is actually committed to doing a lot in terms of this quality is Focus Interactive. Focus Interactive has been one that's been publishing a lot of AA games. They published A Plague Tale Requiem and the first one as well. They've been publishing some really, really, small games that have been bangers overall. And this has pretty much taken them to a whole different level right now. In fact, the quality of their games is, in a sense, on par with almost many AAA studios that are out there at this moment. Even though these AAA studios are able to pump out bigger games or bigger budget titles, it just seems to me like their quality is just not meeting it, and a small publisher or a publisher in the caliber of Focus is getting the job done. And I think that's one thing that many people appreciate about, these studios, or many people appreciate about Insomniac, that they probably are not necessarily paying attention to on that side. They're seeing the games and they're like, man, this is great. But the amount of work and the amount of push that you would need to be able to get a game like this is wild. But I think this is probably what we're seeing right now, and it's just the best circumstances. I think what would probably, in a sense, do things or make things quite streamlined for a lot of these studios or publishers is that they actually follow Insomniac's business model and actually even cut a little bit out of their production time. You see, Insomniac is doing one-party development. So if they make a 20-hour game, the circumstances will be different from, say, another studio making another 20-hour game. Because that 20-hour game is not going to be a 20-hour game for one, device. It's going to be a 20-hour game for 3 platforms, of which the PC platform is basically a nightmare in this new generation to develop for. So I strongly believe that as these studios or as these publishers are looking at their video games, it might be time for them to start taking on a business strategy that's different. Making 15-hour games is not going to be out of the question. Why? A lot of gamers out here are growing up. They don't have too much time to be playing this 60, 70-hour games anymore. So this might be the opportunity for us to not see a situation like this happen ever again. But are they going to listen? Thanks for watching. Peace out.